heavy pair of boots hits the top stair. Through the dust, the beam of a flashlight catches a mask of burned, jagged metal. You are trapped in the basement of an abandoned cabin, and the figure on the stairs is moving towards you. This isn't a new threat. This mask and these heavy clothes belong to a tragedy that the local community tried to forget 22 years ago. In 2004, Black Pine Lake was a popular summer destination in Ravens Hollow, Vermont. It was home to Camp Hollow Creek, a remote site tucked deep inside a dense, nearly impenetrable forest. That summer, a quiet teenager named Eli Voss was targeted by 6 other campers. They locked him inside an old equipment shed near the water as a prank. Before they could go back for him, a storm arrived, and a fire consumed the structure, with Eli still inside. When the fire died down, the 6 survivors were accounted for, but Eli had vanished. Investigators found the shed empty. No remains were ever recovered, and the case was closed after the campground was declared structurally unsafe and abandoned. The locals stopped talking about Eli Voss, but they also stopped visiting the lake. The trauma of that night stayed behind in the cabins, leaving an unresolved history that the forest slowly began to swallow. In 2026, 6 friends, Ethan, Ryan, Maya, Lily, Noah, and Chloe, bypassed the locked gates. They had found an old maintenance key and wanted a weekend away from cell service. They chose the one place in Vermont where no one would look for them. Upon arrival, they found a warning carved into a pine tree. The wood was fresh. It said, 7 came here, only 6 left. Inside cabin 6, they found a second artifact. A photograph from 2004 showed the original group of 7 standing by the water. One face had been violently scratched away, as if someone had tried to erase that person from the record entirely. The former caretaker, Walter Crane, appeared at sunset to deliver a final warning. He told the group that tonight was the anniversary of the fire, and that they needed to leave the property before the clock struck midnight. The group stayed. They ignored the carvings and the caretaker's deadline. By remaining at the campsite as the clock hit 12 a.m., they were the only people on the property when the anniversary cycle began. At midnight, the forest went silent. The wind stopped, and the insects ceased their noise. The group's Bluetooth speaker remained powered on, but the music was replaced by high-pitched, rhythmic static. A sound of metal scraping against metal echoed from the woods. Noah grabbed a flashlight and walked into the trees to find the source. He never returned, and his calls for help never came. A tall figure wearing a burned metal mask stepped out of the fog. He stood completely still, then pointed directly at cabin 6. The group retreated inside, but the cabin offered no protection. Something heavy began slamming against the exterior walls, shaking the foundations and shattering the windows. As the front door began to splinter, the friends fled into the cabin's basement. They huddled in the dark as they heard the heavy footsteps of the killer moving across the floorboards directly above their heads. There are no windows in the basement and only one set of stairs. The group is now confined to a single room, listening to the killer descend the only way out. While searching for a weapon, Ethan found a narrow tunnel hidden behind an old storage shelf. It led away from the cabin and deeper into a subterranean bunker that appeared to have been inhabited for years. On a desk, Maya found a newspaper clipping from 2004. Most of the article was blacked out with a marker, but a few words remained visible, screaming from inside the lake. The report suggested that the screams heard on the night of the fire didn't come from the shore. They were coming from somewhere beneath the surface of the water. This diagram shows the campground. On the surface, it looked like a standard camp, but the equipment shed sat directly over a hidden mine shaft. When the fire started, the floor collapsed, dropping Eli into a submerged tunnel system. A cassette recorder sat near the files. When they pressed play, they heard the voice of a teenage boy. It was Eli Voss, recorded long after the fire. He was alive. On the tape, Eli described something else living in the mines, a creature that emerged from the water and began to mimic the faces and voices of the people it encountered. This recording changes everything the town believed about the 2004 disappearances. The original 6 teenagers weren't being hunted by a vengeful classmate. They were being hunted by the entity Ely encountered under the lake. The group followed the tunnel until it opened at the water's edge. They were trapped between the lake and the approaching footsteps of the killer. 2 identical figures wearing the burned metal mask stepped out of the darkness. They were the same height, wearing the same clothes, and moving with the same deliberate gait. The first figure removed its mask to reveal an older, heavily scarred Ely Voss. He had spent the last 22 years living in these tunnels, tracking the creature from the shadows to keep it from leaving the lake. The second figure dropped its mask, and its face immediately shifted. Its skin rippled like wet clay before melting into a featureless, black-eyed void. Ely Voss tackled the creature, and both fell into the deep, black water. They disappeared beneath the surface as the lake began to churn and bubble. The struggle ended in silence. Ely was never the monster the locals feared. He was the only person who knew the truth about what lived beneath Black Pine Lake. At dawn, the police arrived at a quiet campground. They found no bodies and no signs of a struggle. All that remained were 2 identical charred metal masks floating on the surface of the lake. 6 months later, Ethan tried to resume his life. He avoided the woods and stopped answering calls from unknown numbers, trying to move past the events of that summer. A package arrived at his door with no return address. Inside was a single photograph of the campground, taken from the edge of the woods. The photo shows all 6 friends standing around a campfire. They look exactly as they did before the disappearances, but the date written in the corner is June 17th, 2027, 1 year in the future. Ethan's phone rang. It was Noah's voice on the line. He whispered that the group was still at the lake and that they were waiting for him to come back. The mimic didn't just kill the group, it replaced them. It is now wearing their faces and using their voices, ensuring that the hunting cycle at Black Pine Lake will never actually end.